2, 1. Welcome back, Bulldog fans. It has been a while, a long while, Steve, since we even had a chance to talk at all about Bulldog football. But as Coach Dan Mullen pointed out, it's been 28 days as of tomorrow since Mississippi State was on Scott Field right behind us. Now, about 23 hours from now, they will be kicking it off with Brigham Young coming to town to complete a home-and-home series. I was at the game last year with BYU, and while they've graduated their quarterback from last year, I think they graduated their running back. Still a lot of similarities expected from the Cougars this year.
It's true, David, and I mentioned earlier this week in the press conference with Dan Mullen, the quarterback running back tandem BYU presented last year, one of the better ones that the Bulldogs saw last year, to be fair.
And State still should have won the game.
Absolutely. And quarterback play this year has been very bad for BYU. 4 touchdowns tossed against 12 interceptions. Taylor Mangrum was the starter up until week 3. Hurt an ankle. He's expected to be back as the starter this week. Played a little bit last week. 2 touchdowns on the year, 6 interceptions. So it's not a dynamic offense, but it's still an offense with an offensive line that's big enough to give the Bulldogs some trouble if they're not careful.
In some ways, you could almost say this is kind of a non-conference version of it, like in Arkansas, a team that likes to pound the ball, control the clock. They just don't have the horses to do it this year. Their efficiency down. As Dan Mullen pointed out, they've really self-inflicted turnovers all year. Haven't been forced turnovers, self-inflicted turnovers. And this dog defense, they've got the potential to force turnovers and take advantage of those. This could be the kind of game that could help this dog defense really get back on track.
It's true, David, because they are a little bit loose and fast with the football. Coy Detmer Jr., the son of former Colorado player Coy Detmer, 3 pick sixes against Utah State. And so they're a team that has the propensity to turn the football over. But what happens if State isn't able to generate those turnovers or create those turnovers? That's where the Bulldog offense has to step up. It's a defensive unit at BYU. It's big, not necessarily as athletic perhaps as what we saw a year ago, but it's a unit the Bulldog offense is going to have to strike with early.
Of course, last time we talked, Mississippi State was coming off his loss at Auburn to second road loss of the season, now 3-2, 1-2 SEC. Playing, obviously, 2 of the better teams in the SEC, maybe 2 of the better teams in the country in Georgia and Auburn. That still left a lot of State fans frustrated, as were you and I and the Bulldogs themselves, about not even looking competitive in those 2 games. Let's look at the offense first. All the guys we've talked to said they spent the open day addressing some things like technical fundamentals, things that maybe they had let slip during a couple of games there that they had such easy success the first couple of weeks. What have you heard, kind of the feedback from coaches and staff as well?
Well, kind of what you said, David, the bye week gave them an opportunity to kind of get back to basics and kind of re-emphasize some fundamental things that State did well in the first 3 ball games they perhaps got away from. Maybe they got caught up listening to their press clippings a little bit and listening to the noise a little bit and talking about them being the second best team in the Southeastern Conference. That talk has proven to be a bit premature. But now it's time to kind of reset things. You know, like you mentioned, David, we've had 2 weeks to kind of stew in our misery due to the bye week. But these Bulldogs have had an opportunity to kind of refine some things and get ready to play again. I think we're going to see a more polished product on the field this Saturday.
Sticking with the offense, State's ground game was ground dead the last 2 weeks, but so much of that had to do with falling behind big and early, where you just got to get out of your game plan and try to score points quicker. That was not what State was going to do well against those 2 defenses. Probably not what they do really well in a big picture sense this season. This should be a game where, even though BYU is a very physical defensive team, very veteran team, not a lot of speed there, not a really dominating defensive line on that side. This should be a game where Eris Williams, Nick Fitzgerald, other guys, Kylan Hill, could see some really productive snaps.
I think that's true, David, and I think it's going to start with the run. I think the run has to set up the pass because you want to be able to get those safeties involved in the ball game. Maybe you hit a pass down the field a little bit, loosen things up, but you can't let them play in the box and get downhill. But you've got to establish Nick Fitzgerald as a runner, which makes the offense that much more prolific. State's a lot more multiple when you can get 5, 6, 7 yards on first down and get into second and manageable and avoid those third and longs. And that's kind of what happened. Like you mentioned, David, State kind of got behind in the game, behind the chains, and were forced to kind of abandon some of the things that they do well. Hopefully a big start tomorrow will change that.
Staying with offense a little bit longer, Martinez Rankin, Dan Mullen wouldn't come out and say it Monday. We probably don't expect him to play tomorrow, and not so much because he could be rushed back into action on that sprained ankle in the first half at Auburn, but a week would do him much better getting ready for the Kentucky game. And plus, Greg Island, I thought, committed himself pretty well at the left tackle position, and you have some options. You could also move some guys around.
You do, David. You could do some musical chairs because Elton Jenkins played well last year at left tackle. Deion Calhoun has played some at center. Mike Story has played some at left and right guard. So the Bulldogs have some options. I believe initially we'll start with Greg Island at left tackle and see how things go, and then Coach John Havasu can make adjustments from there. I think it's pretty safe to say Martinez Rankin won't play. And as you mentioned, Dan Mullen didn't come out and just say that. But just based on what we've seen and what we've heard, that appears to be at least another week, possibly two. It's something that we'll continue to monitor, David. But the main thing is for State now, they've got an opportunity now to kind of get right in the month of October. Now, nobody forecasted losing one of your better players on the offensive line, but that's the nature of football. You've got other players on scholarship have to step up and earn their value and show some production for this team. This is a ball game Mississippi State simply has to win no matter who's in or who's out.
We'll update injury situations as best we can at tomorrow's pregame, actually pre-morning when we talk sometime. You'll be scratching the sleep out of your eyes, Steve, getting ready for the early morning kickoff. But we'll talk together in video more what we know about the status of Martinez Rankin and some other guys like Corey Thomas, not expected to play. We do expect Gabe Miles to be back. We'll kind of be looking for some other people like that. Defensive side of the ball. Yes, the secondary's had some real struggles the last two games, especially the safety positions. Maybe so focused on stopping the run, they left themselves vulnerable to getting bit by the pass. But I think, Steve, just watching it from my vantage point in the press box, and you've seen it on the field as well, not much push from the defensive line the last 2 weeks.
That's true, David, and I think some of that is that hesitancy on play action. You know, Georgia, one of the better rushing teams in the country. Auburn, a rushing team at large. Offensive line play was much better for Auburn against Mississippi State, and again last week against Ole Miss. That's a team that is really beginning to crown a bit, shall we say. BYU, not the rushing threat that either Auburn or Georgia are. So I think, number one, your Bulldog defensive backs can play with a little bit more discipline because there's not that fear that they had the previous 2 weeks. Not to mention, I don't know that BYU is capable of consistently making plays in a vertical passing game. So I believe you can really run some base defense and run some pressures out of that and then hold this BYU defense into a situation where kind of a bend but don't break, because if you give them the opportunity, they will give you the football.
In fact, you would almost want BYU to try to approach this game as vertical passing, as strange as that sounds given State's coverage issues, because having watched their offensive line against Boise State, which is not really an overpowering bunch themselves up front, you would think this would be a game State's defensive line could really get some pressure on the passer and force him into those turnover plays.
And, David, when you're a 1-5 team, everything kind of feels like it's out to get you. You get a bad call, you get a penalty here and there, you get a turnover, all of a sudden that familiar doubt creeps back into your head, and it's kind of here we go again. That's why I think it's so important for State to get a good first half under their belts, because of the fact you've got a team that's coming in here with a 1-5 record, coming in from a different time zone, having to travel all day today and then get up early in the morning and go play a football game against a team that quite simply is better than them. State needs to show how much better early in the game.
I was smiling because you used the phrase bad call. Yes, Bulldog fans, I was here in 2001 when a Mountain West officiating crew, the only holding call assessed all game was only because their offensive center grabbed hold of Ronald Fields so well he pulled him over on top of him, and the crew had to throw the flag on that. Otherwise, BYU held all night. Well, BYU's offense is totally different now than what it was then, and even though it was not made official on Monday, we do understand the officiating crew for this game should be SEC, because BYU, after all, is an independent, not part of a conference, to bring a crew with them. And I believe they use Pac-12 officials on their home field. So maybe ease a few Bulldog minds out there for people who are still scarred by the memory of that December 2001 game when the Cougars came in, won on a field goal, should have lost the game had the refereeing been a little bit better there. But, hey, that's long ago, far away, I guess we can say. Of course, last year Bulldogs were losing overtime, but not much of a revenge motive this time, because it's just not that type of game. This is a game, as you said, for the Bulldogs to get themselves right.
And, David, when you date back to 2000, Mississippi State should be going for a 4-game winning streak in this series. It's so crazy. Wayne Madkin, of course, wins the big ball game out there between the mountains, and then you have the officiating snafus here in 2001, and then a drop pass last year that should have won the ball game. And so this has been a competitive series. There are no games scheduled for the future, so you'd like for the Bulldogs to end the series on a winning note, and certainly the better of the two teams at this point, David. But, you know, to get back to your point, it's about Mississippi State and their execution. It's not about a revenge factor. It's not about really bowl eligibility. It's about this is the next game, so it is the most important game. And with State's lackluster play the last couple of weeks, the effort's been there. The execution hadn't been drops, been pre-snap penalties. They've got to clean those things up this week and get ready for a Kentucky team coming in next week with a lot of confidence.
You know, he mentioned the 2000 game. Yes, I was there also when DeCenzo Miller made that video game run before halftime, and Josh Morgan's pick six for 90 yards. I think he used up all the oxygen left in Provo to make that run back there, but that was a good time, and that's the kind of game Bulldog fans really want to see tomorrow. Now, honestly, we don't know what kind of score to expect there, because it's also the kind of game where maybe a Dan Mullen wants to take the lead and kind of get some guys out there. Like he said Monday, you know, there's some linemen developed. There's some other guys, the defense, they want to get out there and get some chances, because already after the open date, you can't help but think a little bit about next year as well. So we'll see how the game develops. But as said, tomorrow, sometime around 9:30, 10, Steve and I will talk quickly, update us what we know about injuries, what we know about matchups, and about recruiting visits. Morning game is kind of tough to get visitors in, and of course State right now is so close to filling up the signing class. I'm not sure how much room they have to bring in a bunch of visitors, maybe looking more towards the future in that regard. But we will update that from Scott Field tomorrow morning. But then again, we expect you to be here, so look at it on your iPad or your cell phone. Get here to Scott Field, Davis Wade Stadium, for tomorrow's 11 o'clock kickoff. Brigham Young, as I always say at home games, you only get now 5 of these left in the 2017 season. Come grab the chance. The weather looks like it's fabulous. And then start making your plans next week for homecoming. Oh, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention tonight Maroon Madness. Both the Lady Bulldogs and the Bulldogs will be in Humphrey Coliseum with a light show by a visiting entertainment group. A chance to go kind of get a look at what Ben Howland and Vic Schaefer have to play with this coming season as well. And just enjoy it and relax. Just come make it a nice, long, great weather weekend here in Starkville, Mississippi State University campus at Humphrey Coliseum and Scott Field. And take a peek at Dudy Noble Field. You're going to see a lot of steel has already risen there as the new stadium takes shape. So, for Steve Robertson, for Gene Swindoll and Mike Nemeth, this is David Murray of dogsbite.com, genespage.com.